Sometimes the darkest truths about a person Dan T show up in the big moments. They slip out in the quiet seconds, when you least expect them. And that's exactly what happened on the night Maggie got ready for what she thought would be a simple dinner to support her husband. She stood in front of the mirror, wearing a soft navy dress she'd worn 100 times before. But to mark her husband suddenly wasn't good enough. He stormed into the room, shaking his head like she'd offended him personally.
Oh.
No, absolutely not, he snapped, as if he were a stylist on a meltdown instead of the man whose dreams she'd supported for years. To him, the dress wasn't elegant, wasn't stylish, wasn't eye-catching enough. He said she looked like a nun, like she was embarrassing him, like she didn't understand how her outfit could supposedly affect his future. In his world, she wasn't a partner, she was an accessory, a marketing tool, something to display, not someone to love. And that should have been her first warning. But Mark wasn't done. He kept pacing behind her like he was evaluating a car he might buy. Women are like cars, he muttered words that made Maggie's stomach twist. He said she wasn't a Ferrari, but he didn't want to show up driving an old pickup truck either. And then, like a cherry on top of disrespect, he added, "You've got more under these clothes than you show. My boss needs to see that." Maggie could feel her heartbeat thumping in her throat. It wasn't jealousy. It was unteen security. It was the shock of finally seeing the disrespect he'd been hiding behind fake affection. But Mark wrapped it all up in a pretty bow labeled "Our Future." "Please, Maggie," he whispered. "Hey, this job is important. For us," that word again. It's the same word he used whenever he wanted something at her expense. So she changed. Into a dress she hadn't worn in years, a bold, fitted shade of burgundy. She never wore around Mark, because he always said modesty is attractive. But tonight the rules had changed. Tonight she wasn't being asked to be his wife, she was being pushed to be his advertisement. And as she stepped out, Mark's face lit up with satisfaction. Not love, not pride, just victory. He told her to wear more makeup, as if her natural face wasn't good enough. As if beauty was some requirement for his dreams to come true. But Maggie stayed silent. She had learned long ago that arguing with him only led to blame, guilt, and manipulation. When they arrived at the corporate building, Maggie tried to shake off the uneasiness brewing inside her. But the moment Mr. Walker entered the room, swaggering, arrogant, smiling a little too long, she felt the danger instantly. He greeted Mark with the fake warmth of someone who loved power more than people. He skimmed Mark's resume and acted impressed, but his eyes drifted to Maggie far too often. Walker liked to talk about real men, the kind who hunt and dominate. He laughed at his own sexist jokes, bragged about being a bachelor by choice, then shamelessly commented that a woman's purpose was to please a man, S.I. His words were loud, his intentions were louder. But Mark didn't flinch. No, he didn't look offended. He didn't defend his wife. He just nodded along, desperate to fit in with the man he thought would decide his future. And as if the evening wasn't uncomfortable enough, Walker invited them to dinner, not for business, not for hospitality, but to see Mark's taste in women. And Mark, without asking, Maggie agreed. The dinner was worse than the meeting. Walker kept leaning in close to Maggie, throwing sleazy compliments wrapped in fake charm. He told crude jokes, made remarks about her body, and even hinted that she should be his main course. Maggie pushed back with dignity, but every time she defended herself, Mark brushed it off. "He's just a man," he said. "Relax. Smile. Don't make a scene." It was in that moment Maggie realized something heartbreaking. Her husband was in tea, just ignoring the disrespect he was willing to endorse it if it meant getting the job. And then the moment came. The moment that turned a bad night into a life-changing revelation. Walker, with a disgusting smirk, raised his glass and made the kind of toast that should never exist. He told Mark he'd love to show Maggie his boat tonight, and then, in the most revolting exchange of human dignity, he implied that if Maggie spent the night with him, the job would be Mark's in the morning. Maggie froze. Her chest tightened. She waited for Mark to reject it. Push back. Stand up. Defend her. Anything. But instead, Mark said yes. Not loudly. Not proudly. But with enough acceptance to break her heart in ways she didn't think were possible. And in that single moment, Maggie realized the truth. Her husband was in tea, just willing to sell his integrity for a job he was willing to sell her. Like she was a bargaining chip, a tool. Something tradable, disposable. But fate has a strange way of revealing truth at the right time. Just when Maggie thought she was going to be dragged into a nightmare, Susan, the woman introduced earlier, stepped forward, and suddenly, everything changed. Susan pulled Maggie aside and quietly revealed the truth. Walker wasn't a CEO. He wasn't a boss. He wasn't even an employee. He was an actor, a hired performer, paid to behave horribly, paid to provoke, paid to test Mark's character, and the real boss, Susan herself. She wasn't a secretary. She wasn't an assistant. She was the CEO of the entire company Mark wanted to work at. And the dinner? The misogyny? The boat offer? All of it had been part of a loyalty ethics, an integrity test, one that Mark failed so spectacularly he didn't even deserve a second chance. Susan explained that she grew up around men who tried to control her, objectify her, buy her, and silence her. She fought her way to power so she could make sure women like Maggie never had to experience that kind of hell again. And tonight, she had witnessed exactly the type of man she refused to hire. Mark tried to defend himself, stumbling over lies and excuses, insisting he misunderstood the situation. But Susan didn't budge. A real man, she said firmly, protects his partner, not trades her. Her words weren't loud, but they carried the weight of 1,000 realities Mark refused to face. And that's when Maggie finally found her voice. For years, she had been silent, quiet, accommodating. She overlooked the red flags, ignored the insults, forgave the belittling comments, all for the sake of keeping a marriage built on illusions. But tonight, the mask fell. She realized Mark loved the idea of success more than he loved her. He valued a job more than her dignity. And worst of all, he saw her not as a life partner, but as a tool for his own benefit. She looked at Mark broken, desperate, scrambling, and for the first time, she didn't feel sympathy. She felt clarity. She told him the truth he never wanted to hear. That the house they lived in belonged to her father, not him. That the bills were paid with her salary, not his. That for months he had lived off her kindness while pretending he was in control. And starting tonight, he would have none of it. No house, no money, no wife. And then, with the calmness of a woman who had survived too much to be afraid anymore, she walked away. Susan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, guiding her toward the exit. Not as a victim, not as a burden, but as an equal. A woman with strength. A woman who deserved better. Maggie wasn't just leaving a toxic marriage that night. She was reclaiming her identity, her worth, her freedom, and Mark. He was left standing alone in a room filled with the consequences of his own choices, because sometimes the worst punishment. E&T, losing the job at S, realizing you lost the one person who believed in you long after you stopped deserving it. And as the night closed, Susan whispered the final truth Maggie needed to hear. A woman is not a bargaining chip. She is not a currency. She is not a tool. She is a force. And any man who can't see that loses everything.